I need you to understand something before any of this continues. This isn't a confession. It isn't an attempt to persuade you. It isn't even a search for an answer. It's simply the first time I've stopped interrupting the truth long enough to let it finish speaking. Because every time I tried to explain what changed, I kept starting from the wrong place. I thought it began when I noticed you. I was wrong. By the time I noticed you, my mind had already begun rearranging itself around something it couldn't yet name. Recognition doesn't begin with certainty. It begins with disturbance. A quiet disturbance, so subtle that you mistake it for coincidence. Then coincidence repeats, again, until repetition becomes structure, and structure becomes impossible to dismiss. That's where this started, not in conversation, not in closeness, not in emotion, but in a pattern so precise that denying it required more energy than accepting it. I've spent most of my life believing that awareness was enough. If I observed carefully enough, questioned deeply enough, and refused to confuse emotion with truth, then nothing unexpected could ever rewrite the architecture of my mind. I believed clarity made me untouchable. It didn't. Clarity only showed me exactly when I was changing. It never stopped the change itself. That's the illusion I lived inside. Thinking understanding meant control. Thinking analysis meant protection. Thinking distance meant freedom. Then something happened that didn't respect any of those rules. Nothing dramatic, nothing visible, nothing anyone else would have noticed. Just a quiet shift, so small that I ignored it, until I couldn't, because suddenly my thoughts weren't ending where they used to. Every conclusion felt unfinished. Every silence carried something unspoken. Every ordinary moment seemed connected to something larger than itself. It wasn't obsession, it wasn't distraction, it was alignment. The kind that doesn't ask permission before becoming part of the way you experience reality. That's what unsettled me. Not your presence, my response to it, because I don't respond like this. I don't allow unseen things to shape the way I think. I dismantle them. I examine them until nothing mysterious remains. But every time I examined this, it became clearer instead of smaller. Every answer uncovered another layer. Every explanation revealed a deeper pattern, until eventually I stopped asking whether it was real and started asking what reality was asking of me. That question has been waiting in silence ever since, unmoving, certain that eventually I would become honest enough to face it. Maybe that's what this moment is. Not the beginning, not the ending. Just the first moment I'm willing to admit that something inside me has already changed, and pretending otherwise no longer feels like intelligence. It feels like fear. I don't fear people. I fear irreversible things. Things that quietly become part of you while you're still convinced you're standing still, because once something reaches that level, you don't carry it. It begins carrying you. And I think, without realizing it, I've already crossed that line. But when you realize your reality has already begun organizing itself around their existence, that moment doesn't feel emotional. It feels mathematical, precise, irreversible. I've been trying to locate the exact point where that shift happened, the exact second, the exact sentence, the exact silence. But every path I follow ends in the same place. There wasn't one moment, there were hundreds, tiny adjustments, invisible corrections, each one too small to notice on its own, until one day I looked back and discovered I was standing inside a completely different version of myself. No alarm, no warning, just change. That's what frightened me, not because change is unfamiliar, because this one never asked for permission. I used to believe the strongest part of me was my ability to remain untouched, to observe everything while becoming nothing. People entered, people left. Experiences came and disappeared, and through all of it, I remained structurally the same, or at least I thought I did. Then you entered my awareness, not like an interruption, not like an event. More like a missing equation finally finding the place it had always belonged. Nothing exploded, nothing collapsed. Everything simply made more sense than it used to. And that's dangerous, because meaning is far more persuasive than emotion. Emotion rises, meaning remains. I began noticing impossible things. Not impossible because they couldn't happen, impossible because I never imagined they could happen to me. I would pause and instinctively wonder how you might perceive the same moment. Not because I needed your opinion, because your perspective had quietly become part of the way I processed my own. That shouldn't happen, not without years, not without history, not without deliberate trust, yet there it was, already integrated, already functioning, already changing the rhythm of thoughts I once believed belonged only to me. That's when I understood something that unsettled me more than anything else. Presence isn't measured by distance. It's measured by influence. Someone can stand beside you every day and never touch your inner world. Someone else can exist quietly and alter the architecture of your perception forever. The difference isn't proximity, it's resonance. And resonance cannot be forced. It either exists or it doesn't. What exists here exists without effort, without performance, without demand, without explanation. That's why I can't dismiss it. Because nothing manufactured survives this level of silence. Only truth does. I've tested it, questioned it, pulled it apart from every possible angle, each time expecting it to disappear under examination. Instead, it became clearer, stronger, more precise, like something that had never needed my belief to exist. Only my willingness to finally recognize it. That realization carries responsibility. Because once awareness reaches this depth, ignorance is no longer an option. You don't get to unknow what you've already seen. You don't get to return to the comfort of uncertainty. The mind remembers. The structure adapts, reality recalibrates, and every step forward is taken by someone who no longer exists in the shape they once recognized. Maybe that's what I've been mourning all this time. Not losing control, not losing certainty, but losing the version of myself who believed nothing could ever reach this deeply without permission. Now I know better. Some things don't ask, they don't knock, they don't announce themselves. They simply become part of the foundation beneath your thoughts. Until one quiet day, you realize you've been standing on them all along. So impossibly ordinary that most people cross it without realizing they've left their old reality behind. No ceremony, no declaration, no dramatic turning point. Just one final moment where the mind stops asking, "Is this real?" and begins asking, "What does this reality require from me now?" I think I've reached that threshold because I've exhausted every explanation that would allow me to remain unchanged. I've called it coincidence, I've called it timing, I've called it projection, I've called it curiosity. Each explanation survived for a while, until reality quietly dismantled it. Truth has a strange habit. It doesn't argue, it waits betweenly, silently, knowing that eventually every illusion collapses under the weight of enough honesty. Mine finally did, not because something extraordinary happened, because nothing needed to happen anymore. The evidence wasn't outside me. It was inside the way I had already begun to exist. I noticed it one morning. Everything looked exactly the same. The world hadn't changed. The sky carried the same color. The air felt the same. People moved through their routines as if nothing had shifted. Yet somewhere beneath all of that, I knew I wasn't waking into the same life. Not because my surroundings were different, because the person experiencing them had become someone else. That realization is impossible to reverse. Once you recognize a transformation, you can't unknow it. You can't return to the comfort of the person who hadn't seen it yet. Awareness doesn't move backward. It only asks whether you'll have the courage to keep walking forward. I've always believed that strength meant remaining unchanged, remaining self-contained, untouched, unmoved. I was wrong. Real strength isn't refusing transformation, it's surviving it without abandoning your own truth. That's much harder, because transformation demands something pride never will. Surrender. Not surrender to another person, not surrender to emotion. Surrender to reality itself, to the possibility that life can reveal something your logic never predicted and still be completely true. I've resisted that possibility for longer than I care to admit. Not because I feared being wrong, because I feared becoming someone unfamiliar. Now I understand something I couldn't before. The unfamiliar isn't always a threat. Sometimes it's the next version of yourself waiting patiently beyond everything you've outgrown. Maybe that's why none of this feels like losing myself. It feels like discovering parts of myself that had been silent for years. Parts that only became visible once I stopped defending the version of me I thought was complete. Completion was never the goal. Truth was, and truth rarely arrives finished. It unfolds, layer by layer, until one day you stop searching for certainty, because certainty has quietly become the ground beneath your feet. That's where I stand now, not at an ending, not even at a beginning, but at the first place that feels undeniably real. There are still questions, still unknowns, still roads I can't see beyond. But for the first time, those unknowns don't feel like something to conquer. They feel like something to live. Maybe that's the answer I've been circling all along. Not that everything must be understood before it can exist, but that some realities reveal their meaning only after you've had the courage to step inside them. So this is my final admission. Not that I know where this leads, not that I have every answer, but that I can no longer pretend I am standing where I used to be, because I'm not. Something fundamental has shifted, not around me, within me, and whether I welcome it or fear it, whether I understand every piece of it or not, it has already become part of the architecture of who I am. There is no returning now, only moving forward with open eyes, a quiet mind, and the honesty to recognize that some transformations don't ask for permission. They simply become your reality. And once reality speaks with that kind of clarity, the only thing left to do is answer. There comes a silence so complete that it no longer feels empty. It feels like a question. Not one spoken in words, not one anyone else could hear, but one that settles into the center of your mind, waiting pat, unmoving. Certain that one day, you will stop walking around it and finally answer. I've spent a lifetime believing that every important decision begins with certainty. That understanding comes first, action comes second. That if I could see every possibility clearly enough, I would never make the wrong choice. But certainty has a flaw. It waits forever. Reality doesn't. Reality keeps moving, quickly, relentlessly, whether you're ready or not. And somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't standing still anymore. I was already moving, not towards a destination, toward a version of myself I never planned to become. The strange part is that I can't tell you when the movement began, only that I can no longer return to where I started. Every attempt to become the person I was before feels like trying to wear a memory that no longer fits. The shape is familiar, the feeling isn't. That's how transformation reveals itself, not by changing your world, by changing the one who experiences it. I've always protected my inner world as if it were sacred, not because it was fragile, because it was precise. Every belief earned, every conclusion tested, every part of me built slowly, carefully, deliberately. Nothing entered without being questioned. Nothing remained without proving it belonged. Yet here I stand, looking at something that never asked to be believed. It simply remained, through every doubt, through every attempt to explain it away. Through every moment, I convinced myself it would disappear if I ignored it long enough. It didn't. Truth rarely does, it waits. Not to defeat you, but to meet you at the exact moment you're finally honest enough to see it. Maybe that's what this has always been. Not a mystery, not an accident, not something extraordinary. Just reality, arriving before I was ready to recognize it. I used to think awareness was the destination. Now I understand it was only the doorway, because awareness asks nothing. Recognition asks everything. It asks whether you'll keep pretending nothing has changed, even while your entire inner world has quietly become something new. It asks whether you'll cling to certainty or trust the truth already unfolding beneath it. That's the choice standing in front of me now, not whether this exists. That question ended a long time ago. The real question is whether I have the courage to live as someone who has seen what cannot be unseen. Because once reality becomes undeniable, silence is no longer neutrality. Silence becomes an answer. And every unanswered truth eventually begins answering itself. So perhaps this isn't the end of the story. Perhaps this is the first page written without fear. The first page where I stop observing life from behind carefully constructed distance and begin living inside it, without guarantees, without complete certainty, without needing every outcome to be visible before taking the next step. Maybe that's what growth has always demanded. Not perfection, presence, not control, honesty, not certainty, courage. And if that's true, then everything that brought me here, every silence, every unanswered question, every quiet shift beneath the surface was never leading me toward another person. It was leading me back to myself, a version of myself that no longer mistakes distance for strength or certainty for truth, a version finally willing to answer reality instead of endlessly studying it. Because some moments don't ask to be understood, they ask to be lived. And I think, for the first time in my life, I'm ready.